In the darkness of a command center in Canberra, a decision was being made that exposed the friction between political leadership and military command. While government officials in secure rooms decided to pull back an operation that had been months in planning, thousands of kilometers away, a team of Special Air Service Regiment operators were already on the ground, deep inside the objective area, committed to a mission their political masters were about to attempt to unwind. The Special Air Service Regiment operates at the cutting edge of special operations warfare, conducting missions that standard forces cannot accomplish and that governments prefer to neither confirm nor deny. SASR operators understand they operate at the intersection of military necessity and political deniability. They are professional enough to navigate this terrain, but the operation in question would push this understanding to its limits, raising fundamental questions about chain of command and what happens when political and operational realities collide. Months of intensive intelligence work had identified a target deemed important enough to warrant the commitment of a dedicated special operations team. The operation was sensitive, too delicate for regular government meetings, requiring the highest levels of political approval and multiple layers of authorization. The target was significant enough that failure would have consequences extending far beyond the immediate tactical situation. The planning process involved careful coordination between different Defense Force elements and liaison with key political figures who needed to be read into the operational details. Military planners worked through multiple scenarios, identified potential risks and vulnerabilities, and developed comprehensive mitigation strategies designed to address contingencies. The operation had been formally approved through proper channels, the team had been carefully selected and thoroughly prepared, and insertion had been officially authorized to proceed. The team consisted of some of the most capable operators available within the SASR. Men who had trained for years to conduct exactly this type of mission, who had previous experience in complex operational environments, and who understood the terrain and the potential adversaries they might face. The insertion itself was a carefully orchestrated operation involving multiple supporting elements, precise timing to reach the objective area during a window of opportunity when detection was less likely, and all the logistical machinery necessary to place a small group of highly trained soldiers deep inside hostile territory. Intelligence had been gathered about the specific location, the potential resistance they might encounter, the routes they would use, and the general operational environment they would find once on the ground. Every detail had been considered through careful analysis. Every contingency had been planned through rehearsal and review, and every member of the team was clear on his specific role and responsibilities. The insertion proceeded as planned, with precision honed by months of rehearsal. Each team member moved to assigned positions on timeline. Equipment was checked and double-checked. Routes were carefully selected based on terrain analysis and intelligence. Radio contact established according to predetermined schedules. The team began reconnaissance and surveillance work. The first communications confirmed successful insertion and readiness to begin. What they did not know was that back in Canberra, the political situation had shifted. Concerns emerged about the operation's continued viability. According to accounts from later inquiries and governmental reviews examining this incident, concerns had been raised from various sources about whether the operation should continue. Some sources described diplomatic considerations that had changed, suggesting that an ally or concerned party had expressed reservations about the operation proceeding. Others indicated that new intelligence assessments had raised questions about whether the timing remained appropriate or whether the objectives remained valid. Whatever the specific catalyst, the decision that emerged from the highest levels of government was that the operation should be pulled back, modified, or potentially canceled entirely. The decision needed quick communication to the field. The longer the team remained without knowing, the greater the risk became. But communication proved far more complicated than straightforward orders would suggest. The channels through which communications would normally flow were burdened with the same security restrictions and classification protocols that governed all aspects of the operation. The operation itself was so sensitive that only certain people could be informed, certain communication systems could be used, and certain procedures would need to be followed. The team in the field was operating under communication protocols designed to minimize interception risk, 70s, messages at specific times, through specific frequencies, using specific procedures carefully designed to keep their presence as hidden as possible. Communication windows were limited, often separated by hours or more, meaning urgent messages would need to wait for the next scheduled contact window. Radio systems were subject to atmospheric conditions, geographical barriers, and inherent equipment limitations. Even when messages were transmitted and windows opened, there was never absolute certainty that messages had been received clearly or understood as intended. The need to communicate the political decision had to be balanced carefully against operational security requirements. A significant gap emerged between the political decision and the operational communication of that decision. Reports suggest confusion about whether the order to pull back or cancel the operation had actually been transmitted to the team in their entirety, or whether it had only been communicated to certain elements of the chain of command without reaching the field operatives themselves. Other sources describe a situation in which the communication was attempted but failed to reach the team due to technical issues, timing problems, or other operational factors that were beyond the control of those attempting to transmit the order. Still, other accounts suggest that the communication was received, but that it was ambiguous enough that the team in the field interpreted it differently than those who had sent it intended. Whatever the specific nature of the communication failure or misunderstanding, what became clear in the hours and days that followed was that the team in the field was operating under the impression that their mission was continuing, while the political authorities in Canberra believed that they had issued an order to pull back or halt the operation. The gap created a situation of profound tension and considerable operational complexity. The team in the field was acutely aware of their mission parameters, understood the timeline they had been given, and knew the specific tasks that they needed to accomplish. They understood that they were committed to the operation, that they had been inserted into the objective area specifically to conduct this mission, and that their designated role was to push forward toward the completion of the objectives they had been assigned. The fact that political considerations had shifted in Canberra, that government leadership was now concerned about the operation, and that orders had been issued to pull back the team was not something that had been successfully communicated to them through the available communications channels. From their perspective in the field, they had been given a mission. They had been inserted to conduct that mission, and the correct course of action was to continue forward and accomplish the objectives that had been assigned to them. The team decided to continue with the operation. Rather than standing down, waiting for clarification, or treating the ambiguous communications they had received as orders to halt, the team interpreted the situation as one in which they needed to proceed with their mission. The operators made a deliberate choice to continue forward, to accomplish the tasks they had been assigned, and to complete the objectives that had been the reason for the entire operation. This represented a significant operational decision made by men who understood their mission, understood the risks, and understood the implications of what they were doing. It represented an assertion of operational authority, rooted in the military principle that once a team is committed to a mission, committed to an area of operation, and committed to accomplishing specific objectives, that team should follow through on that commitment unless explicitly ordered to stand down. What the team did not necessarily appreciate, at the moment they made this decision to continue, was exactly how much political pressure was being generated back in Canberra by their continued presence in the operational area. The political authorities who had issued the order to pull back were now becoming increasingly concerned about the situation. They had made a decision to halt the operation. They believed that decision had been communicated to the field, and now they were faced with the prospect that the team was either not receiving their orders or was choosing to disregard them. This created a situation of significant tension between the political and military hierarchies. The political authorities held the ultimate authority to commit or not commit military forces to operations, yet the military operators in the field were proceeding with their mission despite the orders to pull back. The communications channels through which political authority could be asserted were constrained by security considerations, and the operational reality was that a team of special operations soldiers were conducting sensitive work in a hostile area regardless of what was being decided in Canberra. The situation was further complicated by the fact that some elements within the Australian Defence Force command structure appear to have had different interpretations of what was happening. According to various accounts, there were officers and commanders who understood the political decision to pull back the operation, and there were others who believed that the operation should be allowed to continue, that the team should be permitted to accomplish its mission, or that the political authorities were overreacting to considerations that were not as important as the operational imperatives in the field. This created, in some cases, what might be characterized as a form of passive resistance to the political order to stand down. Communications about the order might be delivered in ways that were technically correct, but that did not convey the urgency or the definiteness that the political authorities intended. Clarifications about whether the order meant to stand down immediately or to complete current operations and then withdraw might be left deliberately ambiguous. In the military, where hierarchy and the chain of command are supposed to be absolute, these forms of institutional resistance to political orders represent a significant deviation from normal practice, but they are not unheard of in situations where military professionals believe that political considerations are overriding important operational objectives. On the ground, the team continued their work with disciplined focus. Movements through the operational area were deliberate and careful, calculated to avoid detection while positioning themselves to observe or access assigned targets. Operational discipline was absolute. They adhered to communication schedules, maintained observation posts and staging areas, conducted surveillance and reconnaissance activities, and managed the logistics of staying hidden and operational in an environment where discovery could have resulted in significant consequences. They moved through the operational area according to their plans. Intelligence was documented through photographs, written notes to be carried out upon extraction, and radio transmissions at scheduled communication windows where they could safely report their discoveries. The exact nature of what they accomplished remains classified and not officially confirmed by the Australian government. What is clear from accounts that emerged is that the team accomplished what they set out to do. They completed the mission and obtained the intelligence that had been their objective, despite Canberra's decision to pull back. The situation extended for a significant period. Different sources provide different timelines, but the political situation grew tenser, stakeholders engaged more deeply, and contingency extraction plans were made for how to extract the team if they came under fire or if the operational situation deteriorated. The team remained focused on their mission, but noticed inconsistencies in communications, sensing the situation had become more complex than initially understood. Full implications became apparent to everyone involved. In Canberra, frustration built as the team continued operations rather than standing down, clear evidence their order had not resulted in compliance. The military command structure managed tensions between political authorities and their own ranks, with different officers viewing the situation differently, some understanding the political order, others believing the operation should continue. The team continued operations knowing their mission authorization was ambiguous at best. Mission completion ultimately resolved the situation. Once primary objectives were achieved and intelligence obtained, the team's posture shifted toward extraction and withdrawal. The decision to move toward extraction was communicated through the chain of command, providing a face-saving resolution to the complicated situation that had been unfolding. Rather than continuing to conduct additional operations or additional reconnaissance, The team moved toward completing their presence in the operational area and preparing for extraction. The nature of this transition was handled in a way that allowed the different parties to maintain their positions about what had happened while simultaneously moving toward a resolution. The question of whether the political order to pull back would be followed became somewhat moot. The team was moving toward withdrawal. Canberra could declare that its order had been followed, the team could maintain that they had completed their assigned mission, and the entire situation could be presented in a way that satisfied different constituencies for different reasons. Extraction followed the contingency plans that had been developed for this purpose. The team withdrew from the operational area according to established procedures. Supporting operations were conducted to provide security and ensure the extraction could be completed safely, and the operators were brought back from the field and returned to their base. The operation was formally concluded. The team was extensively debriefed by multiple levels of command, and the various command authorities who had been engaged in managing the situation were able to assess what had happened and what it meant for future operations and for the relationships between political and military hierarchies. Political fallout emerged gradually. Some government members who had advocated pulling back viewed the situation as evidence the military was not respecting political control. They argued the inability to effectively communicate orders represented a breakdown in political authority and called for investigations and assurances it would not happen again. Others, particularly those who had advocated continuing, saw the situation differently. They argued the team demonstrated sound judgment, understood mission requirements the political authorities had not appreciated, and accomplished objectives important for national security. They pointed to lessons about the nature of special operations and the importance of allowing capable operators to make field decisions when political direction becomes ambiguous. The resolution of this political tension appears to have come through a combination of factors. First, there was an acceptance on the part of both political and military authorities that the operation had been successfully completed, and that whatever questions might exist about how orders had been communicated or how the team had interpreted those orders, the mission had ultimately been accomplished. The objectives that had driven the entire operation had been achieved. The intelligence or operational results that had been sought had been obtained. The team had completed their work and had been successfully extracted. Whatever the procedural issues or the questions about chain of command, the fundamental mission had succeeded. Second, there appears to have been a broader understanding that both the political authorities and the military commanders involved in managing the operation understood the complexities of the situation and were willing to move forward without conducting a protracted investigation or a public inquiry that would have required detailed discussion of an operation that remained classified and sensitive. Various sources suggest that senior figures within government and within the Defense Force met to discuss what had happened, that a shared understanding of the situation was developed, and that it was decided that the operation would not become the subject of a public controversy or a parliamentary inquiry. Third, the situation prompted a significant amount of internal discussion and review of how such situations should be handled in the future. The Australian Defence Force examined its procedures for communicating political decisions to pull back or modify operations to teams that were already in the field. The government reviewed its own processes for ensuring that orders issued to the military were being properly received and understood. Various proposals were made about how to improve communication, how to clarify chains of command in situations where political direction and operational necessity might come into tension, and how to ensure that in the future such ambiguous situations would be avoided. While many of the details of these reviews remained classified, the broad outlines of the thinking became understood within defense circles and influenced how special operations were planned and executed in subsequent years. Upon their return, the team was debriefed extensively. The nature of these debriefings, The specific questions that were asked, and the exact way that the situation was characterized by different levels of command all remain classified. However, various sources suggest that the operators were asked to provide detailed accounts of what had happened when they had understood the orders to pull back, how they had interpreted those orders, and what had driven their decision to continue with the mission. The team appears to have explained their actions in terms of their understanding of the mission, their assessment that the political orders they had received were ambiguous or had not been clearly communicated, and their belief that the correct course of action was to complete the mission they had been assigned to accomplish. There does not appear to have been any significant disciplinary action taken against the team or against their commanders, though the exact nature of how the Defense Force assessed their conduct and their decisions remains part of the classified record of this operation. This revealed profound truths about special operations and political military relationships. In theory, the chain of command is absolute and unambiguous. Political authorities control the military. Military leaders execute political orders without question or exception. In practice, especially in special operations, significant complexity emerges that theory does not fully account for. Field teams operating in remote locations have limited and intermittent communication with higher authorities. Decisions that need to be made in the field must often be made by the operators themselves because waiting for guidance from higher command could compromise the mission or put the team at significant risk. The distinction between a political order and an operational suggestion becomes blurred when communications are limited by security requirements and decision-makers are not in the field to understand all the factors and variables the team is working with. When a team is already committed to a mission, deep in the operational area, and already engaged in the work they were sent to do, the question of what happens when political authorities want to pull back becomes genuinely difficult to resolve. If the team does not understand or does not accept that the political authorities are issuing a definitive, unambiguous order to cease operations immediately, the gap between political and operational timelines became significant. Political decision-making follows one rhythm: decisions made, communicated, implemented, results awaited. Operations follow another. Teams need time to move to objectives, conduct missions, extract, insertion, operation, and extraction cannot be instantly reversed by political decision. A team deep in an objective area cannot extract immediately without significant risk. Emergency extraction lacks the planning of deliberate insertion and creates more risk than continuing the planned operation. These operational realities can create tension with political realities in ways that produce genuinely difficult decisions. This incident influenced how subsequent operations were planned and how political-military relationships were managed. Greater emphasis emerged on ensuring shared understanding of operation timelines, points where operations could be modified without significant risk, and contingency plans if political direction changed during operations. Greater emphasis also emerged on communicating political modifications through multiple channels to ensure the field team received, understood, and could execute properly. Single communications were insufficient when teams could not easily clarify decisions or when communications were intermittent. The broader implications extend well beyond this single operation. Special operations commanders and operators understand implicitly that they serve in roles where political authority and military authority need to be balanced carefully. They understand that they operate under orders from political authorities, but they also understand that those political authorities are often not in a position to fully understand or manage the tactical and operational realities of what is happening in the field. This creates a form of professional understanding in which operators are expected to exercise judgment about when political orders need to be followed precisely as stated and when military necessity dictates a particular course of action, even if that course of action creates tension with stated political direction. This professional understanding is not the same as insubordination or as a rejection of political control over the military. Rather, it reflects a sophisticated understanding of how military operations actually work in practice, as opposed to how the theory of civil-military relations suggests they should work. It reflects an understanding that in modern special operations, where teams can be operating in remote locations with limited communications, where the political authorities might not have full information about what is happening on the ground, and where operational situations can change rapidly, some degree of judgment and discretion on the part of the operators becomes necessary. The question of how much judgment and discretion is appropriate, and how to ensure that such judgment and discretion does not become a form of unauthorized deviation from political control, is something that militaries around the world struggle with continually. The operation in question provided a case study in these tensions and their potential resolution. The team that continued despite ambiguous political direction made a decision that turned out to have resulted in the successful completion of important military objectives. They accomplished what they were sent to accomplish. They obtained the intelligence or conducted the specific operations that had been their purpose. They returned safely. The operation from a purely military perspective was successful in every measurable dimension. This operational success, according to various accounts, significantly influenced how the political authorities ultimately evaluated what had happened and how they chose to respond. While there were legitimate concerns about communication breakdown and about the need to ensure that political orders were followed more clearly and unambiguously in the future, there was also a recognition that the team had exercised sound professional judgment and that the operation had been worth conducting, even if the political direction to pull back had been issued during its execution. The success of the operation provided essential space for resolution of the political tensions that had emerged during its conduct. The incident ultimately revealed that political military hierarchies in special operations are more nuanced and complex than standard civil-military relations theory acknowledges. Circumstances exist under which military operators exercise judgment about interpreting and implementing political directions. Judgment viewed as professional and appropriate even when creating tension with stated direction. Political authorities retain ultimate authority to commit forces but face significant practical constraints, modifying operations already underway. Distance, communication limitations, and the nature of special operations create circumstances where standard chain-of-command procedures become difficult to apply in practice. The team members involved in this operation, upon their return and after their debriefing, did not appear to suffer any significant professional consequences for their actions in the field. The commanders who had been involved in managing the situation appear to have retained their positions and their professional standing. The Defense Force appears to have treated the operation as ultimately successful, despite the political complications. Over time, as security classifications loosened, and as people involved in the operation retired or moved on to other positions, the story of the operation became part of the organizational history and culture of the SASR. According to various accounts from people within special operations circles, the incident became a reference point for discussions about the nature of command in special operations, about how orders should be interpreted in the field, and about the complex relationship between political control and military necessity. The incident, in various forms, became embedded in the institutional memory of Australian Special Operations Forces, serving as a case study in how real-world command decisions are made when theory and practice collide. The lasting impact of this incident on Australian Special Operations doctrine and on how the Australian Defence Force manages sensitive operations appears to be significant. There was a move toward greater clarity about what political decisions meant, toward ensuring that political authorities and military commanders had aligned understandings about the decision points in an operation, and toward developing more robust communication systems that would ensure that if political direction changed, that change would be clearly communicated to the team in the field. There was also, according to various sources, a move toward greater acceptance within the Defense Force that special operations commanders needed to have a degree of discretion and judgment in how they interpreted and implemented orders, particularly when circumstances changed in the field and when the full tactical and operational situation was not immediately apparent to those making political decisions. This incident remains, even decades later, a case study in how civil-military relations actually function in practice, as opposed to how they are supposed to function in theory. It demonstrates the real tensions that can emerge when political authorities attempt to exercise control over military operations that are already underway, when communications are constrained by security considerations, and when the teams in the field have developed their own understanding of what the mission requires. It demonstrates the sophistication of professional military operators who understand that they need to respect the chain of command and the political control of the military, but who also understand that in the field, judgment and discretion about how to execute orders sometimes becomes necessary. It demonstrates the complexity of managing special operations in ways that satisfy both the political requirements for control and oversight and the operational requirements for flexibility and decision-making authority at the point of execution. The broader lesson is that the reality of how military forces are actually controlled and directed is considerably more complex and nuanced than formal organizational charts and official procedures would suggest. Circumstances exist where the formal chain of command and formal procedures for the exercise of authority can become strained or even temporarily broken, particularly when political and operational timelines come into conflict. Military organizations are composed of professionals who understand these tensions implicitly and who make judgments about how to navigate them based on their understanding of military necessity, professional responsibility, and the broader context of what they are trying to accomplish. When these tensions are resolved, they are often resolved not through strict application of formal procedures, but through a shared understanding among political and military authorities that certain objectives are important enough to justify the operational approach that was taken, even if that approach created tensions with stated political direction. The operation demonstrates how Australia's government and defence force manage sensitive operations and the inherent tensions that arise when political control and military operations intersect. It demonstrates the professionalism of Australian special operations soldiers who understand their role in serving under political authority, but who also understand that in certain circumstances, exercising judgment about how to interpret and execute that authority becomes necessary. It demonstrates that the Australian Defence Force and its special operations units in particular have developed sophisticated procedures and understandings for managing these complex relationships. And it demonstrates that when decisions about pulling back operations have to be made, those decisions become considerably more complicated if the team in the field is already committed to the mission and already deep in the operational area. The resolution of such situations, as this incident reveals, requires more than just issuing orders. It requires communication, clarity, a shared understanding of what the mission requires, and ultimately a recognition that operational success and political control, while they need to be balanced against each other, are not always easily reconciled when circumstances change and when the orders that need to be issued are complex, sensitive, and difficult to communicate clearly to teams that are operating in remote locations with limited communications capabilities. What this situation revealed about the nature of special operations warfare and about the relationship between political control and military operations was profound. The experience underscored that in the realm of special operations, the formal chain of command can become strained when real operational circumstances diverge sharply from political expectations. It revealed that the distance between political decision-makers and the actual operational environment creates inherent challenges to exercising control that simple hierarchy and formal authority cannot fully address. It demonstrated that operators in the field, faced with ambiguous communications and complex tactical situations, will sometimes make independent judgments about how to proceed, and that these judgments can be defensible even when they create tension with stated political direction. The precedent that this incident set influenced how subsequent Australian operations were planned and how relationships between political authorities and military commanders were managed in the years that followed. There was greater emphasis on pre-operation briefings that ensured all parties had a shared understanding of what decisions could be made at what levels, what decision points would trigger changes in operational approach, and how any modification of political direction would be communicated to the field. There was also greater emphasis on establishing robust communication systems that would allow field teams to clarify ambiguous orders and to ensure that political direction, if it changed, could reach the team through multiple channels to minimize the chance of miscommunication. These procedural changes reflected lessons learned from this incident and contributed to more effective management of civil-military relationships in subsequent special operations. The incident became understood within defense circles not as a failure of command authority, but rather as a demonstration of the inherent complexity of managing special operations when political and operational timelines diverge and when the political authorities cannot easily reverse or modify decisions that have already been made in the field. It became a reference point for understanding that military excellence sometimes requires judgment calls that extend beyond the strict application of formal procedures, and that military professionals of the caliber that serve in units like the SASR understand and navigate these tensions as a normal part of their professional responsibilities. The story eventually circulated through Australian military institutions and defense circles, discussed in certain forums and among those with appropriate security clearances, becoming part of the institutional knowledge about how special operations actually function in practice. It provided a cautionary tale about the dangers of assuming that orders issued from the political center will necessarily result in immediate compliance in the field, particularly when teams are operating under communication constraints in denied environments. It also provided a more positive lesson about the quality of Australian special operations personnel, their professional judgment, their commitment to completing assigned missions, and their ability to function effectively even when higher authority was sending contradictory or ambiguous directions. The operation exposed a genuine tension between how civil-military relationships are theoretically supposed to function and how they actually function when special operations are underway in complex operational environments. In theory, political authorities issue orders and military personnel execute those orders. In reality, particularly in special operations, the situation is considerably more nuanced. Teams operating in the field must often make decisions about when to seek clarification, when to interpret orders loosely, and when to exercise independent judgment about what the mission requires. Political authorities, while they retain ultimate authority, face practical constraints on their ability to modify or reverse operations that are already underway, particularly when communication with the field team is limited and intermittent. The examination of this incident by military historians and analysts in subsequent years emphasized that the operation had been ultimately successful from a military perspective. Objectives achieved, intelligence obtained, team safely extracted. This success, according to various analyses, was significant in determining how the political complications were ultimately resolved. Had the operation failed or had it resulted in significant casualties, the political recriminations would likely have been more severe. The fact that the team accomplished what they had been sent to accomplish created space for resolution of the civil-military tensions that had arisen during the operation. Both political and military authorities could, in effect, declare victory and move forward, even though significant disagreement remained about the appropriateness of the team's decision to continue operating despite political direction to stand down. What emerged over time was a more sophisticated approach to planning special operations that took seriously the kinds of tensions that had emerged during this incident. Military planners and political authorities began developing clearer understandings before operations commenced about how decisions would be made, what would trigger changes to the operational plan, and how any changes in political direction would be communicated to the field. These procedural improvements reflected lessons learned from this incident and contributed to better management of civil-military relationships in subsequent years. The incident, while not widely known outside of defense circles, became an important reference point for how these relationships should be managed and what challenges could emerge when political control and operational necessity came into tension.